Hi there. So we're here to present on the Mediation Event and Negotiators database. We're very excited about this database and sort of hear your feedback on it as well. I'm Matea Peter, and joined here with me is Sanja Badaniak. We're at the University of St Andrews and University of Edinburgh, respectively. And so I'll have a bit of a chat about sort of the rationale and sort of why we're actually doing this database and sort of how we're approaching the project. Sanja will then speak a tiny bit about some of the highlights coming out of it, but we clearly are in a lightning talk, so it's going to be a short and hopefully sweet introduction to what we're working on. So the rationale for the database, and so MEND tracks mediation and mediation-related events involving external third-party actors in contemporary conflicts. And our rationale for sort of designing the data set is that we see peace mediation or mediation itself changing rapidly, and some of that is going to come out of the highlights already. There's definitely less architecture in contemporary mediation processes, sort of decentering sort of the role of the UN or even regional organizations. We're seeing multiple disconnected efforts. And so what MEND is trying to do is it's tracking both sort of formal processes, which do tend to be still organized or feature multilateral institutions. They are trying to establish some architecture, but also looking at parallel activities of other actors. The second thing that we're also seeing, and this is also going to feature a tiny bit in our highlights, is that we're seeing an increasing internationalization of what would normally be initially thought of as civil wars. And so because of that, what we wanted to do in this data set is focus both on sort of pure mediation activities, the way we conceive them, sort of two warring parties, two armed actors, and a third party negotiating. But we wanted to kind of look at sort of activities that are supportive or discouraging of that space. And so I put up the definition of mediation-related activities that we use, and particularly wanted to highlight sort of this idea of coordinating among third-party actors, which is often sort of key to enabling some of the mediation, especially parallel mediation, to proceed. So the rationale for why we actually decided to build this mediation data set is that we see that existing data sets are quite patchy. There's very little systematic data on recent years. And so there's a very clear focus on sort of, especially in sort of the post-Cold War era mediation, and something is changing in the field today. The other thing that we're also seeing in a lot of the mediation data sets is that they're relying on formal reports. And particularly, I'm going to call them Western news repositories, such as Factiva. They're also very process focused. So they focus on formal processes, conference type mediation, rounds of talks, which doesn't seem to be the main feature of the environment today. And then the last thing where we wanted to kind of break some of the mold of the existing mediation data set is that a lot of the data sets are very much focused on conflict dyads. So they're focused on sort of the kind of conflicts that are captured in UCDP or ACLED. But what we would argue is that peace data is actually not conflict data. And some of the findings that we're already seeing is that even in peace agreements, so in successful mediation events, about 3/4 of actors are actually not even present in UCDP or ACLED data set. So we do actually have to think about sort of what it takes to produce peace in slightly different ways than it is conflict. And so this is our attempt to go beyond that. So the way we're approaching it, we start with conflicts that are on the UN agenda, so Security Council agenda. So we think that those are the conflicts that, they threaten international peace and security. And so they're kind of the main laboratory that we're looking in. And then we go through, the methodology is essentially based on sort of layering of sources. We start with what most data sets start with, sort of very traditional formal sources, UN reports, regional organization reports, ICG reporting, sort of very kind of formalized reporting that is featured in a lot of the other data sets. We add on top of that country-specific sources. So, for example, for Syria, we look at Syria Observer. For other conflicts, we have other resources that we look at, and then we layer it with bespoke web scrapes. So those capture global media outlets, and in particularly outlets that don't tend to be featured as much in sort of the Western news repositories. But most importantly, they also capture quite a lot of the local news. At the moment, we're still doing this very much through manual coding. So we have country analysts doing the initial sweep through the sources, and then two senior coders reconciling so the definitions flow through the cases. We'll talk a tiny bit on sort of where we're moving with the next steps on this, but I wanted to kind of pass on to Sanya to give us a couple of highlights.
Thank you, Matea. Right, well, in terms of highlights, there's sort of three broad areas, maybe four, in which we have found some really interesting tidbits in our data, and this is all in relation to last year. So I'm going to start with this idea of the changing format of peacemaking that we're capturing in the MEN data. Those of you that maybe were with us in one of the earlier panels today heard me speak about the PAX Peace Agreements database and dataset, which captures formal written agreements. MEND, on the other hand, has the ability to capture informal, non-written agreements. So in this graph, you can see the country cases that the MEND data are covering. In blue are the dots that represent written formal agreements relating to each of these settings. In red, the agreements that are informal, non-written, and that are captured in the MEN data. So clearly there's definitely a move away from the formal peace processes, formal peacemaking, and that all of our sort of data on formal processes is not able to capture the reality of contemporary peacemaking. In addition to this change in the format of outcomes, we also see a congestion of the mediation space. So in this graph, you can see sort of unique third-party actors in mediation events and mediation-related events in Sudan for every month in from 2023 to the end of 2025. And what you can clearly see is that the number of active external actors is very high, particularly when these mediation-related events are taken into account. Now, you would think that this sort of congestion is sort of chaotic, and to an extent it is. But what we also find in the data when we consider how these initiatives are organized and how these networks of actors operate, we find that initiatives to mediate in Sudan, but also in other settings, do often end up with multiple parallel efforts to achieve agreement among the warring sides. So this is another feature of the contemporary mediation space that we find in the data. So the existence of parallel initiatives that often do not connect, do not speak to each other, and deal with substantively different issues. So one of these strands might be dealing with a ceasefire, another might be dealing with humanitarian issues or prisoner releases and so on, and they might never overlap and may never reach the point where a sort of joint single formal process takes place. Another one of the sort of interesting key findings from our recent data report, which you can find on the PeaceRep website, is sort of matching up really well with the findings in both the data on formal peacemaking and in data on armed conflict. And that's the sort of rise of interstate conflict and internationalized intrastate conflict. So what you can see in this graph is a sort of clear rise and a substantial sort of proportion of interstate related events in our mediation data for 2025. So everything that you see in this graph that is sort of in this orange ochre color are events that relate to mediation between countries, but sort of driven by conflicts that would have traditionally been marked as intrastate. Additionally, sorry. timer is going off. One of the findings from the data relates to the effectiveness of mediators. Now, we consider effectiveness without any normative components to it, just of the ability of third-party mediators to actually solicit agreements from parties. And we see here that there's quite a large number of, what you would what one might consider sort of non-traditional mediators. We see that in the countries that our data cover, Qatar features prominently. The US might be expected, but Turkey and Egypt, for instance, might not have been expected as top effective mediators, enabling parties to reach agreements. Finally, what we find is that traditional mediators are in this new landscape finding new roles. So this shows you the sort of proportion of events in our data by country in which the UK features as a third party. And you can see that when it comes to pure mediation events, the UK, for instance, is not very prominent, but it is prominent in these mediation-related events, sort of particularly when it comes to things like coordinating third parties in talks. I think just from this, we have actually our research cut out for us. This research project will go on for at least one more year, and we will be collecting further data and expanding on the data set. And we're looking forward to any questions and comments.
Yeah, so just to kind of wrap up with some of the more kind of data queries that we have in case there's people on it, one of the things we're now thinking through is because clearly having such a broad scope in terms of the collection of our data, we're thinking of sort of how to use some of the AI tools. And we've done a lot of experimentation already on this, particularly on event extraction, because we have around 10,000 observations a year for quite dense cases. And so I think that's where we see the most potential for kind of having AI tools help us with event extraction. There's other potential avenues that we're exploring, but I think that's the one that I'd like to highlight in terms of the methodological. Fact on sort of where you can find our report for 2025 and the Peace Hub, where we reposit our sort of other graphs and things like that.